Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we sift through a whole stack of profiles, research, deep biographical dives, and really give you the core knowledge, the fast track to those aha moments. Today, we're zeroing in on a career that honestly seems like a bit of a contradiction. We're talking about the intellectual and professional life of comedian Leo Allen. When you really look at his path, you realize pretty quickly he's not just like a funny guy writing sketches. He's a veteran comedian, a really prolific TV writer, an executive producer, and also, maybe most astonishingly, a seriously disciplined literary enthusiast. I mean, he set himself a reading challenge that, most academics probably wouldn't even attempt. Leopold Rufus Allen, born July 5, 1972, in Massachusetts, but he's very much linked with the creative scenes in Detroit, Michigan, and then, later New York City. His success seems built on this really interesting mix of working together, performing with others, and then this kind of solitary intellectual focus. So our mission today is basically to unpack this dual identity: the comedy vet grinding it out on stand-up stages, and the serious professional really committed to deep, broad knowledge. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, what's so compelling about Alan, I think, is how he just navigates these different layers of the entertainment world so smoothly. Usually you kind of have to choose, right? Are you the performer on stage or the writer in the room? Alan is somehow both, and, well, more than both. He mastered that quick collaborative energy you absolutely need for sketch work. Then there's the incredibly demanding structure you need to run a TV writer's room. And on top of that, this self-imposed rigor of a really intense intellectual life. So we're going to trace how his early partnership, this foundational one, kind of made all that possible later on.
Right, the beginning, the sort of genesis of Leo Allen's success really seems to lie squarely with his identity as one half of that comedy team, Slovin and Allen. That's alongside his writing partner, Eric Slovin. Allen started performing stand-up back in the late 1990s, which was, right when comedy was going through a pretty major shift.
Yeah, that late 90s timing is really, really important context. The comedy scene was kind of moving away from that very broad, maybe observational, topical stuff from the early 90s, and it was starting to embrace what we now call alternative comedy, which tended to favor things that were more conceptual, character-driven, and often, delightfully weird or surreal. And that emerging scene was pretty tight-knit, which leads us actually straight to a really key piece of history, a sort of document, the 1997 comedy film Who's the Caboose?
Ah, yes, Who's the Caboose? Allen had an early acting role in that. And okay, it starred Sarah Silverman, but its importance goes way beyond just the lead actress, doesn't it? It wasn't just another indie flick. It kind of acted as a meeting point for that whole burgeoning alt comedy movement.
Exactly. You're talking about a cast that basically became the core engine, creatively and intellectually, of comedy in the 2000s. The sources really stress that this film had the first movie appearances for a whole bunch of comedians who would go on to shape the entire decade. So it wasn't just a role for Allen. It was him placing himself right at the absolute center of a cultural shift. He was connecting early on with peers who valued conceptual humor and, sharp character-based writing. That's foundational stuff.
And that partnership, Slovin and Allen, it cemented pretty quickly. By 2001, they'd achieved that thing every comedy performer dreams of, their own half-hour special, Comedy Central presence.
Oh.
Back in the early 2000s, getting one of those specials was basically the launch pad, national recognition.
And crucially, it wasn't just a stand-up special for them. It really showcased their collaborative sketch work. So it immediately established them as a unit, showing off their specific brand of humor, often pretty high concept, often absurd to a national audience. The sources even give us a taste, mentioning the titles of some sketches they featured: Time Machine and Turkey Slapper.
Turkey Slapper. Okay, that title alone kind of screams we are committed to being absurd. But moving past the laughs for a second, what's really interesting is how the discipline needed to keep a duo like that going actually fed their later success.
That's the vital link, I think, for a comedy duo to really work, especially one that moves from live shows to high-pressure TV writing. They need more than just, good chemistry. They need a deep, shared creative language, a shorthand. They've got to be able to anticipate each other's rhythms, agree on the tone, the pacing. This kind of collaborative intimacy means they don't waste time arguing about the basic idea. They already share the comedic premise, that shared voice. That became their professional currency. It made them super attractive hires for places like, Saturday Night Live.
Right, so they weren't just two solo guys occasionally working together. They were like a single writing and performing machine, totally prepared to handle the intense demands of probably the most rigorous sketch environment out there. Okay, so that successful foundation, that shared voice, it was the perfect springboard into the engine rooms of TV comedy. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. because you see the absolute grind kick in. The duo manages to transition from being performers in their own special to the incredibly demanding high-output world of major network sketch comedy.
And making that transition meant they had to fully commit to the intense structural discipline of a writer's room. Slovin and Allen got hired to write for Saturday Night Live. They worked there for 3 years, from 2002 through 2005.
We often just say SNL like it's, a badge of honor.
Yeah.
But we should pause and think about what that actually means. 3 years. In the SNL writer's room, that's like dog years in comedy time.
Pretty much.
It's a job defined by brutal deadlines, fierce competition, and needing to churn out a massive amount of material every single week. And most of that material never even makes it to the read-through, let alone gets on air.
It really is the ultimate proving ground for professional writers. It demands speed, versatility, and the ability to write effectively for dozens of different performers, different characters, which is a huge shift from just writing for themselves as Slovin and Allen. Their success there really solidified their reputation. They were seen as professional, high output, and just incredibly resilient writers.
And crucially, Allen didn't just stop there. He showed this remarkable adaptability. He broadened his writing credits, his appearance credits, across almost every major comedy format that was running at the time. We're not just talking prestige here, we're talking serious versatility.
Yeah, look at the list. You see him contributing to the absolute gold standard of topical late night with Conan O'Brien. Writing for Conan requires a totally different skill set than SNL. It's often shorter bits, more topical, quick cultural commentary rather than, long character sketches. Then he pivots. He works on the defining projects of that whole indie comedy movement, things like Funny or Die Presents, and that legendary touring show documented in Comedians of Comedy.
And you can't overlook his work on other sketch shows, too, like Human Giant, and Michael Have Issues. This really diverse portfolio proves Allen could operate just as well in the structured network environment, the fast-paced late-night world, and the more experimental cable sketch scene. It's like he could speak all the different comedic languages of the early 2000s.
But the real mark of his writing talent, I think, and maybe the first big clue about his deeper intellectual side, is that his writing went beyond just TV comedy. It actually appeared in the New York Times Magazine,
Right.
which is, highly respected.
That is a massive leap, isn't it? How do you go from, co-creating a sketch called Turkey Slapper to writing prose good enough for the New York Times Magazine? It implies a total command of tone and a kind of structural rigor that goes way beyond just setting up a punchline.
That's the critical insight right there. What it takes for a comedian's voice to work in respected print media like that, it's usually a really sharp observational style. It needs to be rooted in a sustained argument, sophisticated language. You can't rely on visual gags or how you deliver the line. It has to be purely the strength and clarity of the writing itself. It suggests that Allen's comedy perspective was always grounded in some thoughtful commentary on culture, on daily life, which is exactly what you need for high-level journalism or essay writing.
It shows that the same discipline needed to pump out SNL sketches under crazy pressure could be successfully channeled into crafting these nuanced, reflective essays. It proves his intellectual rigor wasn't just about getting laughs, it was about synthesizing ideas. So even while he's navigating this demanding world of TV writing, Leo Allen stays deeply connected to his roots in live performance. He's described as a veteran of numerous New York City comedy clubs, and especially the alternative venues. So that's where you keep sharpening your material, right? Keep testing it. He maintained that dual threat status, doing solo stand-up sets, but also continuing to work on sketch with Eric Slovin.
And the competitive reality of the NYC comedy scene, especially those alternative venues, is really crucial here. Unlike the traditional clubs that focus maybe more on touring acts and tightly structured sets, the alt comedy scene, which was largely spearheaded by the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, UCB, that was a laboratory. It was the place for conceptual stuff, improv, pushing boundaries structurally. You had to prove your material worked live, often to smaller, really clued-in audiences.
And Allen wasn't just performing at UCB. He became a vital figure there operationally. He hosted that super influential weekly show, Whiplash, at the UCB Theater in NYC. And this is key, because hosting a show like Whiplash isn't just getting stage time. It's a curatorial role. It's a leadership role.
Exactly right. Being the host of a major recurring show like that means you're basically responsible for the whole vibe of the evening. You pick the lineup, you set the tone. You often have to guide the audience through stuff that might be pretty experimental or challenging. It's kind of like being a mentor and a manager, but disguised as doing stand-up.
And his impact wasn't just anecdotal. It was formally recognized. He got nominated for a 2009 ECNY Award for Best Host. That specific nomination really confirms how significant he was, not just as a talented performer, but as a central figure who helped shape that whole alternative comedy landscape in the city during its sort of golden age. He wasn't just linked to the institution, he was like a standard bearer for its style and its community feel.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, well, just look at the company he kept during that time. It speaks volumes about where he stood creatively. Look at the comedians he toured with. Eugene Mirman, Dimitri Martin, Todd Barry, Michael Showalter, among others.
That list is basically a who's who of what you might call intellectual comedy, right? Artists who really prioritize structure, high-concept ideas, sometimes that deliberate deadpan style that rewards cleverness and maybe patience from the audience.
Precisely. Touring with those peers tells you exactly where Allen positioned himself creatively. It's like a seal of approval from a whole generation of artists who were redefining comedy success outside the traditional network box. It confirms he was valued not just for his performance skills, but for his writing mind, his intellectual connection to the material. He needed to be able to talk about joke structure, the philosophy behind a premise, the artistic direction of the tour, and those are skills that directly set him up for his next big phase, becoming a comedy architect.
Right, this transition from being a peer performer to an institutional host, and then boom, straight into television production. That's the next major leap in Allen's career. He steps into that executive role, showing he could not just write for a show, but actually build and guide TV projects right from the start.
Yeah.
This is where he really becomes, a comedy architect.
Yeah, moving into being a co-creator and an executive producer, that's a massive professional shift. You go from being responsible just for your own material, which is a very specific, detailed focus, to being responsible for the entire project. We're talking budgets, hiring, managing all these different creative personalities, timelines, dealing with the network, and ultimately guiding this collective vision towards something coherent.
His first big project where he took on this expanded leadership was the comedy series Jon Benjamin Has back in 2011. It ran for one season on Comedy Central, and Allen's involvement was, well, total. He co-starred in it, but crucially, he was also the show's co-creator and executive producer.
That really is the definition of a comprehensive leadership role, isn't it? He was responsible for the show even existing, its financial health, its creative direction, all while still performing in it. That demonstrates not just a creative mind, but huge organizational and managerial skill. It needs decisiveness, the ability to synthesize dozens of different requirements into a plan you can actually execute.
And he followed that up almost immediately in 2012 with a show that's just absolutely legendary in the surreal comedy world, the IFC series Comedy Bang! Bang! And again, Allen wasn't just like a hired writer. He served as a writer and executive producer on that crucial first season.
Being an EP on a project like Comedy Bang! Bang! Means he was deeply involved in setting up the show's incredibly unique tone and its structural rhythm, which is basically like structured improvisation but layered with intense surrealism. That job meant managing a constantly changing cast of really high-profile comedians while somehow maintaining the show's bizarre internal logic.
And if you want just one snapshot, like a perfect example of the unique, absurd comedy style he was championing as a creator, you just need to look at one specific guest appearance he made. He was on the third episode of that first season, aired June 22, 2012.
Yeah. This is one of those wonderfully specific details that just perfectly captures the whole aesthetic he was pushing. He played this incredibly memorable character, delivered completely straight-faced, a man who eats bicycles.
A man who eats bicycles. It's so utterly ridiculous, right? But it's presented with this deadpan earnestness that really defines that whole wave of comedy. It proves that even as he was moving into these high-level executive roles, he was still fundamentally connected to and actively championing the most sort of off-kilter experimental forms of comedy.
And what's key here is the synthesis, I think. The intellectual discipline that lets him structure a show, manage a budget, write for the New York Times. That's the exact same discipline that ensures a totally absurd concept like man who eats bicycles gets executed with flawless, believable commitment. His rigor didn't, dampen his absurdity. It actually gave his absurdity structure and made it hit harder. He was basically translating the creative freedom of the UCB stage directly into the production power of television.
Okay, so we've established Leo Allen as this disciplined performer and acclaimed writer, a high-level producer. But this brings us to the part that truly sets him apart, I think, from almost all of his comedy peers. His serious, dedicated intellectual life.
Right. In September 2005, which remember is right in the middle of this huge transition period for him, he's post SNL, he's actively performing, he's right on the verge of producing. He undertakes this remarkable personal goal. He challenges himself to read 100 books in one single year.
100 books. That's roughly 2 books a week, every week, for 52 weeks straight. While holding down a major career in one of the most demanding industries out there, this isn't just like being curious. This is a profound, almost monk-like commitment to discipline and just acquiring knowledge. For a working professional who's constantly supposed to be generating creative material, setting aside the massive amount of time and mental energy for that level of intake, it's just astonishing.
And this wasn't some, quiet little side project he kept to himself. This challenge was serious enough and frankly unique enough for a working comedian that it actually got national attention. It was featured in a profile by NPR, National Public Radio. That media coverage really highlights how remarkable that contrast was perceived. The guy writing jokes for a living was also diving deep into serious literature.
And halfway through that intense year, the sources actually reveal some of his favorite reads up to that point, which gives us this fascinating map of the intellectual territory he was exploring. And the list shows incredible range, hitting some major cornerstones of world literature.
Yeah, let's break down those 4 favorites he mentioned, because this is where you can really draw that direct line between his reading discipline and his professional output. Okay, first, he cited The Ginger Man by J.P. Donleavy.
Ah, okay. Irish modernist classic.
Exactly. Known for its sort of picaresque structure, really dark humor, and that stream of consciousness style, Donleavy's language is just energetic, chaotic, totally character-focused.
So if you're absorbing Donleavy, you're basically internalizing how to create these really rich, deeply flawed, often chaotic characters, which seems essential for the kind of alternative comedy Allen was making. Think about the bizarre, yet somehow fully realized characters needed for comedy. Bang.
Bang. Precisely. Okay, next up, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov.
The Russian masterpiece. Surreal political.
Totally. It's sprawling, known for intense, dark political satire, blending realism and surrealism, commentary on bureaucracy, the devil showing up in Moscow.
Bulgakov's work is like the blueprint for surrealist satire that actually has a sharp political edge. It teaches you how to keep an underlying structure and serious themes going, even when the story itself is completely wild.
No.
That skill seems absolutely necessary for writing high-level sketch and conceptual TV.
Couldn't agree more. Third, he mentioned Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes.
A big one. The Spanish epic.
Monumental. It's basically the origin point for the modern novel, right? Blending idealism and harsh reality, playing with the whole idea of storytelling and how we consume media.
Reading Don Quixote must teach you narrative endurance, how to manage a huge story arc, how to use stories within stories, how to create a central character whose internal world dictates the whole external plot. These feel like core skills for any TV producer building a season-long story.
Absolutely. And finally, he said, anything by Octavia Butler.
Wow. Okay, foundational American science fiction.
Yeah, known for her really demanding sociological explorations of power, race, identity, complex dystopian futures, Butler is not light reading.
Butler forces you to confront uncomfortable truths, complex world building. That kind of reading discipline seems like it translates directly into a producer's need to conceptualize a cohesive yet challenging world for a show, and grounding strange concepts in recognizable human emotion. It feels like the intellectual underpinning for any kind of speculative storytelling.
What's fascinating here is just the sheer diversity and depth of this list. This isn't just beach reading, To get through 100 books from such different disciplines requires an ability to constantly process, synthesize, and categorize a huge volume of ideas, plots, characters very quickly.
And that, I think, is the direct analogy to his career, isn't it?
Yeah.
The discipline of reading 100 books perfectly mirrors the work of a successful writer and producer. Someone who has to constantly generate ideas, structure massive narrative arcs over a whole season, synthesize feedback from executives, maintain consistency across hundreds of script pages.
It proves his curiosity is genuinely insatiable. But maybe more importantly, it shows he understands how to channel that intellectual energy into a practical, repeatable professional method. The breadth of his reading directly feeds the breadth of his writing ability. That deep dive into literary structure provides the scaffolding for his successful move into executive roles. It allowed him to be both the guy who can write the surreal joke and the guy who can map out the entire season's structure for the network.
It also offers, I think, the ultimate connection back to you, the listener. Allen's career seems to thrive because his intense, sustained curiosity fueled his ability to switch between all these different comedy formats: stand-up, late night, sketch, print, surreal TV production. He wasn't just relying on one specialized skill, he was constantly absorbing new information and applying a fresh perspective to his creative work. Hashtag outro. So, what does this all mean when you put it together? We've traced Leo Allen's path from being a late 90s stand-up, quickly finding his footing as half of that comedy machine, Slovin and Allen, moving on to become a powerhouse sketch writer for SNL, establishing himself as this vital, acclaimed host in the gritty NYC alt scene, and finally maturing into an executive producer and co-creator of really notable series like Jon Benjamin Has.
Yeah, the overarching synthesis, I think, is that Allen really embodies this idea that intellectual depth is the engine for creative and professional stamina. He is the successful comedy collaborator, the WGA award winner, and the serious industry professional who successfully navigated all these worlds: mainstream late night like Conan, structured network sketch like SNL, and experimental cable like IFC and Comedy Central.
The lesson here, maybe especially for anyone listening who wants to excel in a high-demand creative or professional field, seems to be about cross-pollination. Leo Allen's career feels like concrete proof that dedicating yourself to deep, broad knowledge, whether that's reading 100 books in a year or mastering some complex skill totally outside your job description, it directly feeds your creative output and reinforces your professional structure.
That intense, rigorous pursuit of knowledge isn't a distraction from the work. In a way, it is the work. It provides the intellectual flexibility you need to write a serious, sustained piece for the New York Times Magazine one month. And then the next month, successfully guide a TV show where the main character meets a guy who eats bicycles. The depth informs the absurdity. It makes it stick.
It really encourages us, I think, to look beyond our immediate job description and actively invest in those non-professional interests that challenge us and expand our minds. So consider this for your own path. What's the deep, broad curiosity you have right now? Maybe it's a complex hobby, a language you're learning, that reading challenge you've always wanted to try. What might be providing the fuel for your next big aha moment? Because it seems like for Leo Allen, turning off the TV and opening the book was perhaps the secret to making great television.
A truly provocative thought on discipline and discovery. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of Leo Allen.
We'll see you next time.